Deep in the Amazon, where the trees grow so thick the sunlight never touches the ground, something moves. Coiled around a branch, perfectly still, scales the color of polished emerald, eyes like cold ancient gold. Most people will never see one in the wild, and someone, somewhere, knew exactly how much that rarity was worth. One morning, a private collector made a phone call, frantic, barely coherent. His snake was gone. Not just any snake, a specimen so rare, so visually breathtaking, it had been valued at $500,000. Within hours, authorities across 3 continents were alerted. But the missing snake wasn't the real story. It was the thread, and when investigators pulled it, an entire criminal network began to unravel. This is where it starts, in a jungle, at night, with a snake that was never supposed to leave that branch. The Amazon rainforest stretches across 9 countries. It covers more than 5.5 million square kilometers. It is the largest tropical rainforest on Earth, and it holds secrets that most of the world will never fully understand. Hidden inside that green chaos lives one of the most visually stunning reptiles ever to exist. The emerald tree boa, Corallus caninus. It doesn't roar, it doesn't charge, it doesn't even move much during the day. It simply waits. Draped over a branch like a living jewel, its coils perfectly symmetrical, its color so vivid it almost looks artificial, like someone carved a snake from a piece of raw emerald and breathed life into it. And that beauty, that almost impossible otherworldly beauty, is exactly what made it a target. On the black market, a single wild-caught emerald tree boa can fetch anywhere from $50,000 to over $500,000, depending on its origin, its size, and the desperation of the buyer. These aren't casual purchases. These are transactions conducted in the shadows, through encrypted messages, hidden accounts, and networks so sophisticated they would make your head spin. The people buying these animals aren't always criminals in the traditional sense. Some are wealthy collectors. Some are private zoo owners. Some simply want to own something that no one else has. Something rare, something alive. And that desire, quiet, obsessive, and funded by serious money, is what keeps the machine running. A note before we go further. Everything you are about to see is based on real wildlife trafficking patterns, documented cases, and investigative reports from conservation organizations around the world. Some names, locations, and timelines have been fictionalized to protect ongoing investigations and the people involved in them. This documentary exists for one reason only: awareness. Because the first step to stopping wildlife crime is understanding how it actually works. What started as a single disappearance soon unraveled a network that spans continents. And it began, like most crimes do, quietly. It starts before dawn. The jungle at night is not silent. It never is. There are insects screaming from every direction, frogs calling from the dark water below, birds shifting restlessly in the canopy above. The air is thick and wet, heavy with the smell of soil and decomposing leaves. Every breath feels like drinking something. 3 men move through it like shadows. They don't use flashlights, not yet. They know this stretch of forest well enough to navigate it half blind. They've done this before. Each one carries a canvas bag over one shoulder and a long metal hook in their right hand. They move slowly, carefully, stopping every few minutes to listen. They're not hunting for food. They're not researchers. They're not lost. They know exactly what they're looking for, and they know exactly where to find it. Deep in the Venezuelan Amazon, near the border regions where government presence is thin and enforcement is thinner, certain trees become landmarks for people in this business. The high canopy trees, the ones with wide, smooth branches that stretch out horizontally over the water, those are where the emerald tree boa sleep. The lead poacher raises his hook toward a branch about 4 meters from the ground. His light flicks on for just a second. Just long enough. There it is, coiled in perfect symmetry, scales catching the light like crushed glass. A fully grown emerald tree boa, completely undisturbed, completely unaware that the world it has lived in its entire life is about to disappear. The capture takes less than 90 seconds. The snake is placed into a ventilated tube, dark, tight, designed to keep the animal calm through compression. The tube goes into the bag goes over the shoulder. The light goes off. And just like that, one of the rarest animals on the planet becomes cargo. These men are not the top of the chain, not even close. They are what investigators call field collectors, low-level operatives paid a fraction of the animal's actual value to do the most dangerous part of the job. They get paid a few $100s per snake, sometimes less. The real money moves several layers above them through people who never once set foot in a jungle. The snake will change hands at least 4 times before it reaches its final buyer. First, a regional broker operating out of a river town, someone with connections to both the local wildlife trade and international shipping networks, someone who knows which cargo inspectors look the other way and which ones need to be avoided entirely. Second, a logistics coordinator, based in a city, moving animals alongside legitimate shipments of timber, agricultural products, or manufactured goods, hidden in plain sight. A snake inside a tube, inside a crate, inside a container marked hardware components or industrial equipment. Third, a customs contact, a name on a list that no one is supposed to have, a signature that makes certain packages move through without inspection. And finally, the buyer, waiting quietly in a climate-controlled room somewhere far from the jungle, checking encrypted messages, transferring funds through accounts designed to disappear. But on this particular night, something goes slightly wrong. A local ranger station, operating as part of a joint conservation monitoring program, picks up movement on a motion-triggered camera approximately 2 kilometers from where the poachers are working. It's not enough to identify anyone, not yet, but it logs a timestamp. It captures a partial image, the edge of a boot, the outline of a bag. A data point, small, easy to miss. But one investigator sitting in front of a screen hundreds of miles away doesn't miss it. She flags it. She adds it to a file that is already getting very thick. And she starts to wonder if what she's been tracking for the past 8 months is finally starting to break open. The man who ordered this snake had been waiting for 11 months. He knew exactly what he was paying for. Not just any emerald tree boa, a specific one, wild caught, from a specific corridor of the Venezuelan Amazon. Because in this world, origin matters. Rarity matters. And what makes this animal rare, what makes it worth $500,000, goes far deeper than its color. Let me show you what he saw. Corallus caninus, the emerald tree boa. It lives almost its entire life above the ground, coiled on branches over rivers and forest streams, never descending unless it has to. Biologists call it a strict arboreal species. The trees are not just its home, they are its entire world. An adult grows between 1.5 to 2 meters, but size isn't what stops people. It's the color. That deep electric green, broken with white markings along the spine that look like lightning bolts frozen mid-strike. No two individuals are patterned exactly alike. Every single one is one of a kind. And here is the detail that the collector knew, the detail that serious buyers always know, that most people never learn. They aren't born green. Juvenile emerald tree boas hatch orange, brick red, sometimes a deep burning yellow. Over the first year of life, slowly, without any single visible moment of change, they transform. The exact reason is still debated by scientists. Diet, thermoregulation, the shift from forest floor to canopy. Whatever the cause, the result is this: a creature that begins its life as fire and ends it as jade. That transformation is part of what the collector was paying for. The finished animal, the one the jungle spent a year building. And it gets worse. These animals are ambush hunters, capable of remaining completely motionless on a branch for hours, sometimes days. When prey passes below, they strike at a speed the human eye cannot follow, anchoring themselves with a prehensile tail while their body does the work. Their front teeth are among the longest of any non-venomous snake relative to body size, not for venom, for grip, to hold, to not let go. In the wild, they can live up to 20 years. In a smuggled shipment, sealed in a tube, dehydrated, temperature-shocked, passed through 4 sets of hands, the odds drop dramatically. Wildlife organizations estimate that for every live animal that successfully reaches a buyer through illegal channels, several others die along the way. Some studies put that ratio even higher for sensitive arboreal species like this one, which means the man waiting in his climate-controlled basement in Central Europe, the one who had been watching his encrypted messages for 11 months, had almost certainly caused the death of animals he never even knew existed. The one in that tube was the lucky one, so far.
The snake leaves the jungle before sunrise. Sealed inside a ventilated PVC tube no wider than a coffee can, coiled tight in the darkness, completely still. The compression keeps it calm, a biological response that smugglers learned long ago and exploited ever since. Around the tube, balled-up newspaper. Around the newspaper, a layer of foam padding. And around all of that, a plain cardboard box, taped shut, labeled in faded marker, ceramic figurines, fragile. The box goes into the back of a pickup truck. The truck pulls onto a dirt road that doesn't appear on any official map, and the jungle disappears behind it. This is how it begins. Not with drama, not with speed chases or dramatic confrontations, with a cardboard box on a bumpy dirt road moving through the dark before anyone is awake to notice. The first stop is a river town, one of dozens scattered along the tributaries of the Orinoco, small enough to have no permanent customs presence, large enough to have a functioning dock and regular boat traffic, places that exist in the margins of official oversight. Here, the regional broker takes possession. He is not what you'd expect. Middle-aged, soft-spoken, he runs what appears to be a legitimate agricultural supply business: seeds, fertilizers, irrigation equipment. He has a family. He attends community events. His neighbors, by all accounts, have no idea. But in certain encrypted chat groups, operating on platforms that cycle through names and servers every few weeks, he is known simply as El Jardinero, the gardener. He inspects the snake briefly,
confirms it is alive and undamaged, and transfers payment to the field collectors through a mobile money platform popular in the region for its minimal identity verification. A few $100s, less than what most people spend on a smartphone. Then he makes a call. The next 72 hours are the most dangerous part of the journey and the most logistically complex. The snake cannot survive indefinitely in a tube. It needs to be kept within a specific temperature range. It needs hydration. It needs darkness and stillness to remain calm. Moving a live arboreal reptile across borders requires either significant expertise or significant bribery. And in this network, both are available. The broker has a contact at a mid-sized cargo facility, not a major international airport, but a regional hub that processes mixed freight shipments bound for larger transit cities, shipments that are, on paper, completely routine: agricultural byproducts, industrial components, processed foods. The snake, still in its padded tube, is repackaged, this time inside a hollowed-out shipment of dried goods. The outer packaging is professionally printed, barcoded, and accompanied by documentation that appears, at first glance, entirely legitimate. The paperwork has been produced using templates obtained from a real import-export company, whose identity has been quietly compromised. This is not a crude operation. But the night before the shipment is scheduled to move, the weather turns. A tropical storm system, unexpected in its intensity and speed, pushes inland from the coast and grounds all cargo flights out of the regional hub for 36 hours. The shipment sits in a warehouse, temperature uncontrolled, humidity spiking. Inside the tube, the emerald tree boa begins to show stress responses, subtle movements, changes in muscle tension, the kind of signs that, in any legitimate reptile facility, would trigger immediate intervention. Here, no one is watching. The broker receives a message from his logistics contact: delay, weather, holding. He sends back 2 words: keep it alive. What happens in that warehouse over the next day and a half is unknown, but when the storm passes and the shipment finally clears, the snake is still breathing, barely eating, dehydrated, but alive. A small miracle given the circumstances, and also, for this story, a critical one. The shipment moves through 2 transit cities before reaching its destination. First, a major South American hub, where it spends 8 hours in a bonded cargo facility before being transferred to an international flight. The customs contact here is a mid-level inspector who has been on the broker's payroll for over 2 years. His job is simple: don't look too closely at certain shipments, flag nothing, move on. He does his job. The box clears. Second, a British transit point, a large international freight hub processing tens of thousands of shipments per day. Volume is the smuggler's greatest friend. When inspectors are overwhelmed with legitimate cargo, the odds of any single suspicious package receiving scrutiny drop dramatically. The shipment spends 6 hours in transit and is never physically inspected. It clears again. The final destination is a private address in Central Europe, a residential property with reinforced basement, climate-controlled rooms, and custom-built enclosures that would not look out of place in a professional zoological facility. This is not a hoarder's basement. This is a curated collection. Dozens of rare reptiles, amphibians, and invertebrates, each one sourced through channels that would never survive legal scrutiny. The man who owns this collection has a name that appears nowhere in any wildlife trafficking database. He is careful, methodical. He has never directly communicated with anyone below the broker level. Every transaction runs through layers of intermediaries, every payment through a chain of financial structures designed to dissolve under examination. He is, on paper, a retired businessman with an interest in herpetology. He attends legitimate reptile expos. He has donated money to 2 conservation organizations, a detail that, when investigators eventually discover it, will strike everyone as almost darkly comic. He has been waiting for this particular specimen for 11 months. But here is where the story takes a turn that no one in the network anticipated. Because the emerald tree boa that arrived in that climate-controlled basement was not the only one that had been taken from that stretch of Venezuelan rainforest in the past year. And the ranger's camera that flagged the boot and the bag, that single logged data point from 8 months ago, had not been filed away and forgotten. It had been shared. Through a joint monitoring program connecting local rangers, national wildlife authorities, and an international wildlife intelligence network, that data point had reached a small investigative unit based in the Netherlands, a team that works specifically on the intersection of wildlife crime and organized financial networks. They had been building a picture, slowly, carefully, cross-referencing shipping anomalies with known wildlife trafficking routes, mapping financial transfers that didn't quite make sense against legitimate trade data, collecting fragments. The storm delay had been unexpected, but it had created something invaluable, a gap in the shipment timeline that didn't match the weather records at the point of origin, a discrepancy, small, bureaucratic, buried in freight documentation that no one was supposed to examine that closely. But the investigator, the same one who had flagged the camera 8 months ago, had been examining things that closely for a very long time. Her name was Mara, and when she found the discrepancy, she didn't call it in immediately. She sat with it. She pulled the thread. She went back through 6 months of freight records from that same regional hub, and then she found 3 more shipments, different contents listed, different destinations, same structural fingerprint. She leaned back in her chair and stared at the ceiling for a long moment. Then she picked up the phone and called the one person she trusted to understand what she had found. "I think I have the whole network," she said. "How long?" came the reply. She looked at her screen, at the web of connections she had been quietly assembling for the better part of a year. "Give me 72 hours.
Mara Visser had been working wildlife crime for 11 years. She had started as a field researcher in Indonesia, documenting illegal logging operations that doubled as cover for live animal trafficking. She had transitioned into investigative work after watching a confiscated shipment of pangolins, 47 of them, most already dead, being catalogued in a Bangkok evidence room. Something shifted in her that day. Something permanent. By the time she joined the European Wildlife Crime Intelligence Unit in The Hague, she had developed a reputation for 2 things: extraordinary patience and an almost uncomfortable attention to detail. Both of those qualities were about to matter enormously. The discrepancy she had found in the freight records was not, on its own, enough to do anything with. Investigators in wildlife crime rarely get a single clean lead that breaks a case open. What they get, if they're skilled and lucky and willing to put in the hours, is a series of fragments, partial images, inconsistencies, patterns that only become visible when you step far enough back to see the whole canvas. Mara had been stepping back for 8 months. She had begun with the camera image from Venezuela, the boot, the bag, the timestamp. She had cross-referenced it with a report filed by a local ranger about unusual activity near a known emerald tree boa habitat corridor. That report had been dismissed at the regional level as inconclusive. She had not dismissed it. She had pulled freight records from the nearest cargo-accessible river town for the 6-month period surrounding the camera timestamp. Most of it was exactly what it appeared to be: agricultural goods, fuel shipments, basic supplies moving in and out of remote communities. But 3 shipments, separated by irregular intervals, shared a specific structural anomaly. The declared weight didn't match the declared contents. Not by much, a few kilograms each time,
the kind of discrepancy that automated systems flag and human inspectors routinely wave through as measurement error or packing variation. Mara did not wave it through. She brought her findings to her team lead, a former Interpol analyst named Henrik, who looked at her evidence board and was quiet for a long time. "This is circumstantial," he said finally. "Everything is circumstantial until it isn't," she replied. He authorized 2 weeks of expanded investigation. It became 4 months. The unit began quietly building partnerships. The Venezuelan National Wildlife Authority assigned a liaison officer, a young biologist-turned-investigator named Carlos, who had been tracking poaching pressure in the Orinoco Basin for 3 years and had his own collection of fragments that he hadn't known how to connect. When Mara shared her freight analysis with Carlos, he went silent on the video call for nearly 30 seconds. "El Giardino," he said quietly. He had heard the name, or rather the nickname, twice in the past year. Once from a confiscated phone belonging to a field poacher who had been arrested on an unrelated charge. Once from an informant who dealt primarily in jaguar parts, but moved in circles where reptile trafficking was discussed openly. Both times the name had appeared without enough context to act on. Now they had context. The next 6 weeks were the most painstaking of the entire investigation. Building a case against a network this sophisticated required more than identifying the players. It required understanding the architecture, the flow of animals, money, and documentation well enough to dismantle it rather than simply clipping its edges. Clipping edges was the mistake most enforcement operations made. Arrest the field poachers, confiscate the shipment, issue a press release, move on. Meanwhile, the broker finds new collectors, the logistics coordinator finds new routes, and within 6 months, the network is operational again with new personnel and slightly adjusted methods. Mara had seen it happen too many times. She wanted the whole structure, every floor, every wall, right down to the foundation. A wiretap authorization was granted by a Dutch magistrate for communication channels linked to the logistics coordinator, a Latvian national operating out of Frankfurt under a consulting company with no verifiable clients. The wiretap produced 41 days of largely mundane business conversation before, buried in a voice message sent at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, a specific shipment reference number was mentioned alongside a private address in Central Europe. The address matched a property registered to a shell company. The shell company, when traced through 4 layers of ownership, connected to a name. Henrik looked at the name on Mara's screen and exhaled slowly. "We're going to need more people," he said. But then the network went quiet. For 11 days, nothing. No communications on the monitored channels, no shipment activity matching their tracked signatures. The logistics coordinator stopped using his known devices entirely. Someone, somewhere, had sensed something. It happened in investigations like this: a missed call, an unusual question from a cargo inspector, a name mentioned in the wrong conversation. Somewhere in the chain, a warning signal had fired, and the network, like a living organism responding to threat, pulled inward. Mara's team faced a choice: move now with what they had and risk a prosecution that collapsed in court due to insufficient evidence, or wait, hold position, hope the network resumed operations before their surveillance authorizations expired. They waited. On the 9th day of silence, Carlos sent a message from Caracas. Informant contact, new collection operation being planned. Different corridor, same signatures. They're not done. They're relocating. Mara stared at the message. The network wasn't shutting down, it was adapting. And in doing so, it was about to make the one move that would finally give her everything she needed. She sent one instruction back to Carlos: "Don't intercept, let it move. We follow the whole chain this time, all the way to the end." It was the riskiest call of her career. And
it was the right one.
The operation had a name. Internally, within the joint task force that had quietly assembled across 4 countries over the final 6 weeks of the investigation, it was called Operation Canopy. Fitting, in a way. Everything in this case had lived above the ground, in the treetops, in the upper layers of shipping manifests, in the elevated circles of private collectors who believed their wealth placed them beyond consequence. It was time to bring it all down. The trigger came on a Thursday morning. Carlos confirmed that a new shipment, 3 animals this time based on intercepted communications, had left the collection corridor in Venezuela and entered the logistics chain. Mara's team had full surveillance on every layer of the network now. They tracked the shipment in real time, watching it move through the same invisible architecture they had spent months mapping. They let it move, through the river town, through the regional cargo hub, through the first transit city. They waited. When the shipment landed at the European freight hub and was transferred to a bonded holding facility, when every key player in the chain had taken a traceable action in the past 48 hours, Mara made the call. Now. Simultaneous operations across 3 countries executed within a 4-hour window. In Venezuela, Carlos led a joint team of national wildlife investigators and environmental police to the broker's agricultural supply business at dawn. The building was quiet. The broker, El Jardinero, was found in his office, still in the early hours of his working day, completely unprepared for the 12 officers who walked through his door. His encrypted devices were seized, his financial records, his contact lists, his shipment documentation, all of it cataloged and bagged before he had finished processing what was happening. In Frankfurt, the logistics coordinator was arrested at his apartment. He said nothing. He didn't need to. The evidence was already on record. And in Central Europe, at a residential property with a reinforced basement and climate-controlled rooms, investigators executed a search warrant that revealed what Mara had suspected but hadn't dared confirm until she saw it herself. 31 animals, reptiles, amphibians, and invertebrates from 6 different countries, every single one sourced through illegal channels. Among them, 6 emerald tree boas, coiled in custom enclosures, alive, stressed, but alive. The arrested collector was placed under arrest in his living room, surrounded by the kind of quiet, comfortable wealth that had apparently convinced him for years that consequences were something that happened to other people. They happened to him on a Thursday morning in spring. The legal outcomes moved at the pace legal outcomes always do, slowly, with frustration, through systems that were not originally designed with wildlife crime in mind. The broker received a 7-year sentence under Venezuelan environmental criminal law, one of the harshest penalties handed down in the country for wildlife trafficking in over a decade. The logistics coordinator faced prosecution in Germany, where wildlife crime legislation had been significantly strengthened in preceding years. He received 4 years and a financial penalty that stripped most of his traceable assets. The collector's case was more complex, as his legal team challenged jurisdiction and evidence admissibility for nearly 18 months. He was ultimately convicted on 12 counts of illegal wildlife possession and trafficking facilitation. His sentence, 5 years, partially suspended, satisfied almost no one involved in the investigation. But it was on record. His name was on record. The 4 emerald tree boas recovered from the basement collection were transferred to a licensed reptile sanctuary in Germany while their long-term disposition was assessed. Wildlife veterinarians treated them for dehydration, stress-related conditions, and in 2 cases, minor injuries consistent with improper handling during transport. 3 of the 6 were eventually transferred to a certified conservation breeding program in South America, part of a broader effort to maintain genetically viable populations of the species outside their natural range. The other 3 remained in sanctuary care.
Their exact origin within the Venezuelan range could not be precisely determined, making release into the wild a complex and uncertain prospect. They were safe, but they could not go home. And then there was the fourth shipment, the one that predated Operation Canopy by 11 months, the one that had triggered the original investigation. The single emerald tree boa that moved through the network before Mara's team had full visibility, before they could track and intercept. That animal was never recovered. Its last confirmed location was the private collection in Central Europe, but when investigators cataloged the basement facility in detail, cross-referencing every animal against known trafficking records, that specific specimen, the one valued at $500,000, the one whose disappearance had pulled the first thread, was not among the 31 animals found. It had moved again, sometime in the weeks before the arrest, quietly, through channels that the investigation had not yet fully mapped. To whom? Through what route? To what destination? Unknown. The official case was closed.
Here is something worth sitting with. The emerald tree boa did nothing to deserve what happened to it. It was not aggressive. It was not invasive. It was not threatening anyone or anything. It was simply existing, doing exactly what it has done for millions of years. Coiled on a branch above a river in the Amazon, perfectly adapted to a world that was perfectly adapted to it. And that was enough to make it a target. The illegal wildlife trade is the fourth largest criminal enterprise on the planet. Behind drugs, behind human trafficking, behind arms dealing. It generates an estimated $23 billion annually, and unlike some other forms of organized crime, it operates in a space that most people don't think about, don't see, and don't consider personally relevant to their lives. That invisibility is precisely what allows it to thrive. Every rare animal that moves through a black market network represents more than one creature taken from the wild. It represents a gap in an ecosystem, a missing predator, a broken chain. The rainforest does not work like a collection, it works like a web, and every strand removed weakens the structure holding everything else in place. The emerald tree boa is not endangered in the way that word is sometimes used casually. Its populations in undisturbed habitat remain viable. But that phrase, undisturbed habitat, carries enormous weight in a world where rainforest is disappearing at the rate of tens of thousands of acres every single day. Where the pressure of deforestation and the pressure of illegal collection work together, quietly, to shrink the margin of survival for species that were never designed to exist anywhere except exactly where they evolved. When we remove them from that place, when we seal them in tubes and ship them across continents to sit in temperature-controlled basements, we are not preserving them. We are ending them, slowly, one animal at a time. Mara Visser still works wildlife crime. She is currently tracking 3 separate networks operating across Southeast Asia and West Africa. Carlos is back in the field in Venezuela, monitoring the Orinoco corridor with expanded resources that came in part because Operation Canopy demonstrated what was possible when agencies shared information and trusted each other. The field poachers who took the original snake from the branch that night, they were never identified. They are almost certainly still working, because the demand that sent them into the jungle that night still exists. And demand, in the end, is the engine of all of this.
So here is the question this story leaves behind. How many more rare creatures are being hunted in silence right now, in jungles and forests and ocean depths that most of us will never see? By networks that are patient, sophisticated, and funded by money that flows from ordinary people making ordinary purchases in an underground market they believe has nothing to do with them. How many threads are waiting to be pulled? And who is sitting in front of a screen, building a file, patient enough to pull them?
That snake is still out there, in someone's home, in someone's basement, in a collection that exists nowhere in any database under any name that investigators have found. Mara knows it, Carlos knows it, and now, so do you. That's the real power of attention. One camera image unraveled a 3-continent operation. One flagged data point put people in handcuffs. The networks that move rare animals across the world survive on one thing above everything else: the assumption that nobody is watching. You're watching now. So here's what you can do. Share this with one person. Just one. Someone who doesn't know this world exists. Because every conversation that breaks the silence is a small defeat for the people who depend on it. And if you want to know what comes next, the next case takes us to Southeast Asia, a creature that outlived the dinosaurs, a trade so vast we've barely scratched the surface of what's actually moving through it. That story is already built. The question is whether you'll be there when we tell it. Subscribe, and don't look away.